Chapter 70. Emlyn and Kyla. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She was not too surprised that Minos would come to her and start a conversation. It was not uncommon to know that a fifth-stage spiritual beasts could speak the human language. She couldn't believe that someone was able to recognize her race in a place as poor as this. To begin with, her race had not come to the central continent for centuries, much less to a place with such a poor spiritual density. So, it was unexpected that someone would recognize her race in these areas. At the same time that the mother fox was completely shocked by what Minos had said, Dillion was also quite surprised. He had never heard of such a race, but he already expected Minos to recognize it since he had inherited the expertise of a high-level specialist. As the mother fox stared at Minos, Ruth finally approached the group and began to look closely at the beasts in front of her. The little fox looked very normal to her, but her mother was completely unusual. She had never seen a fox with more than one tail. And even though some great powers of the central continent knew of this race, Ruth was not a part of them. After all, her empire never had a god. It was just a second-tier empire. The mother fox then spoke for the first time. How do you know about my race? I can tell you about it later, but then, won't you tell me your name? Minos said with a smile on his face. The fox looked at him for a moment and said. My name is Emlyn. But what difference does it make to you? You will probably only try to sell us, like those humans from before. Clang. Minos then shook his head in denial and then opened the cell with his sword. He crouched down to the fox's eye level and said. You are wrong. I will not do that, as I will still give you medical treatment and let you decide your own destiny. Humph, do you think I'm a fool? Emlyn said angrily as she looked at Minos. Minos then ignored the fox's gaze and looked at the butler Dillion and said. Grandpa Dillion, can you start her treatment? All right, young master, Dillion said before entering the cell. He then started using his healing focus technique. Radiant healing. At the same time, a golden light began to be emitted from Dillion's hands, gradually healing Emlyn's wounds. Every time the golden light emitted by Dillion's technique passed through a wound, the wounded tissues of that fox's body began to regenerate quickly. At the same time, the dirt and black blood that had dried were degraded, leaving the wound completely clean before it was closed. At the same time, Minos took a large bowl from his spatial ring and placed it in front of the two foxes. Chuff. After that, Minos began to fill the bowl with water from the spatial kingdom. He then said. Drink. I know you are well dehydrated. There is no poison. Seeing this, Emlyn felt a little strange as she looked at Minos and the bowl. She didn't know if she could trust him, but before she made up her mind, her daughter jumped into the bowl and started drinking the water quickly. Kyla. Wait a minute. She said in a low voice. However, it was no use. The little fox continued to drink. As a spiritual beast, Kyla had great senses, so she knew that this water was not only not poisoned, and it was still very rich in spiritual energy. Kyla's mom just didn't realize it before because she was so worried about Minos. His knowledge was not common for anyone in this place, and she was also severely injured. That is why she could not probe the spiritual water before her daughter. See, if it were poisoned, your daughter wouldn't do that. Drink. It will help your recovery. Minos said. After a while, mother and daughter drank all the water that Minos had put there. Soon after, he took out a bag of spiritual apples and placed it there for the two of them to eat. Minos then patted the little fox on the head and said. What's your daughter's name? Have you already chosen? Her name is Kyla, Emlyn said as she ate several apples at once. She was hungry. Not only did she not eat for 2 days, but she was also drained of spiritual energy. Oh. Beautiful name. Well, Emlyn, although I assure you that you can do what you want, I will still make you an offer. Please listen to everything before refusing. I'll also give you plenty of time to decide, so you don't have to answer now. At the same time that Minos was beginning to speak his offer, Elin and Edward had arrived at the place. They were also curious about this beast that they have never seen before. "Oh, what a beautiful fox!" Elin said when she saw Kyla trying to eat an apple. Meanwhile, Minos approached Emlyn's ears and said in a low voice, "If you agree to join my forces, I will not only allow you to personally kill the responsible for what happened to you, but I will also help you and Kyla to reach level 89 in less than 150 years. Upon hearing this, Emlyn was even more shocked by Minos' offer than when she found out that he could recognize her race. This was because it was not easy for a member of any race to reach the limit of their potential. No, even in the Emlyn tribe, there were only 5 foxes with 9 tails that reached that level in the last generation. What's more, they all did it, only after a few thousand years. Humph, you are saying nonsense. Do you know how difficult it is to reach that level with my potential? It is not easy to find free high-level medicines out there. And for each of it, there is a great massacre for someone to get the right to absorb it," Emlyn said in a mocking tone. And it was challenging to find top-notch medicines that didn't have an owner. Most of these plants were planted within the properties of large families and large tribes. And those powers barely had enough for themselves, so outsiders could forget to buy something like that. And even if someone were to sell such medicine, it would be at such a high price that few people in the world could afford it. And as for those free in nature, well, it was easier to find a needle in the haystack. And even if someone found one of these, it doesn't mean that she, or he, would be the only one. Minos then said with a smile on his face. "I know that, but I can guarantee that what I say is the truth. I can prove it, but you will have to agree to join my forces after seeing this. But you don't have to worry about what I'm going to order from you. In fact, until you reach level 70, I don't plan to ask you for anything. You only need to help me if I am in danger of dying. Otherwise, I will only ask you to do something after recovering your paw and being able to transform into your humanoid form." Minos didn't want to show a 9-tailed fox around. This was too risky, and sooner or later, she could be recognized. That way, to avoid a disaster, he wouldn't ask her to do anything until she could transform into her humanoid form. From then on, unless she used her original form, no one would distinguish her from humans. BL.net According to Minos, it could take 40 to 50 years, but it would be worth waiting for him. A spiritual beast like a 9-tailed fox in his army was like having a human with silver talent. And at the moment, Minos couldn't even dream of it. After saying this, Minos got up to leave and that. "Don't worry about it now. I will help you recover from your injuries, and after that, I will let you deal with that bandit. For now, just focus on recovering. But when you decide, if you want to see my evidence, I can show you, but you will have to accept the deal after that." He wanted Emlyn to come to his side, but to show her the existence of the spatial kingdom without her being compromised would be stupid. So, there was no going back if Emlyn wanted to know if Minos could keep his promises. Upon returning to the group that was admiring the big 5-tailed fox, Ruth asked Minos, "What were you talking about? It felt like you didn't want us to hear," she said with a disappointed look on her face. Minos had spoken loudly just so that the fox and he could hear. That way, no one else knew the content of the conversation, making the curious Ruth not take it and ask him. Minos laughed and then said, "Nothing, we were just talking about common things, like life on the continent of the beast and here on the central continent. She seemed very interested in the way of life here, and so, I talked a little about the possibilities that she would have here." Ruth then opened her mouth in disbelief and asked, "Are you saying that she came from that legendary continent of the beasts?" Why? Are you impressed? It seems that your sect is not that incredible after all." Minos teased her while taking advantage of the appearance of the beautiful Ruth. Chapter 71. The tragic end of Ghoul. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After hearing Minus' provocation, Ruth went out towards the town mansion, with her face completely red. You rascal! She thought to herself. At the same time, Elin and Edouard stopped to congratulate Minus on his group's victory. It was indeed an outstanding achievement that the soldiers of Minus had conquered, killing even level 45 cultivators. Mr. Minus, since the matter in the Yellow City has already been resolved, Edouard and I will return to the Stone Island today. Oh. So, are you already going? Okay, I hope you have a good trip back, and in just over a month, our first dispatch will arrive at that base that we are building on the coast. Minus said. I will make the necessary arrangements for the transportation to be done at that time. After that, it didn't take long, and Elin and her bodyguard left the Yellow City, going to the Maritime City, where they would return to the Stone Island. At the same time, Minus group returned to the local government mansion, spending the next few days until the fox, Emlyn, recovered. After the events that took place at the eastern entrance to the city, the population of the Yellow City was discussing the achievements of the Minus group once again. The group of bandits who had been controlling their town for several months had finally been destroyed. Because of this, many of the people who were skeptical about this group of individuals were just beginning to get a glimpse of hope. This battle was not enough to confirm that the Dry City rumor was hiring, but it lifted the weight of thousands of citizens from this place. The problem was that that group of bandits did not mind running the city. They charged high taxes, they robbed the merchants who passed by, and some were still quite violent. For all these reasons, to be sure that this group of bandits was finished was a relief for the inhabitants of this place. At this time, a group of people was celebrating the news while eating and drinking in a city bar. That bastard Ghoul finally got what he deserved. Someone said it out loud. I heard that he was captured. Are they going to do the execution in public? A young man asked with a twinkle in his eye. Watching executions was an activity that many people enjoyed, especially when a known criminal was caught. An old man then smiled and said, I do not mind. As long as that wretch dies, everything will be resolved. At the same time, various parts of the Yellow City were celebrating the news with great joy, as if this was the best time for this population in a long time. People were screaming in the streets, men and women of all ages smiling as if there was no tomorrow. That night, it was practically impossible to sleep in this region since the party seemed not to end. And in this festive atmosphere, quickly 3 days passed in the Yellow City. In the meantime, the butler Dillion had healed most of Emlyn's wounds, to the point that all the open wounds had been properly recovered. She had also received many spiritual fruits from Minus soldiers, so she had recovered much of her energy. As for the little fox, Kyla, she was very happy. Seeing her mother recovering after suffering so much was excellent for her. But not only that, because she was born while her mother was in a region poor in spiritual energy, Kyla had never eaten any delicacy with a high spiritual concentration in her short life. Because of that fact, she was pleased to eat the fruits of the Black Plain, even to the point that she came alone to Minus to get a little more. Right now, Minus was in one of the mansion's rooms, which looked quite noble. There was a good space and several glass windows, which gave great ventilation. But there was not much furniture, nor decoration in the place, just a big bed, a closet, and an armchair. Sniff. Sniff. Minus was still asleep when suddenly he felt something move on his sheets. This was Kyla, who came to wake Minus every day to receive her breakfast. Oh. 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 Minus then turned from side to side of the bed and opened his eyes slowly. He saw a small fox with orange and white fur, with one tail, looking at him with her little eyes in a hungry expression. Kyla, are you hungry yet? It is not yet time to eat, he said while running his hand over the little fox's head. Oh. Oh. She said with a sad look in her eyes. After that, Minus got up and took Kyla in his arms, heading for where Emlyn was. Okay, let's see how your mom is doing first. After that, Minos walked for a few seconds until he reached a large room, where Emlyn was lying on a long rug on the floor. When sensing that someone was looking at her, the mother fox opened her eyes and saw a man holding her daughter while feeding her. In the meantime that Emlyn and Kyla had lost their freedom to Ghoul's bandits, Emlyn was unable to feed her daughter due to injuries to her body. And Kyla already had her teeth grown so that she could eat other foods besides her mother's milk. That is why she had been eating the fruits given by Minos. Minos then placed the fox next to her mother and said, "Okay, your treatment is over. That's a good thing. If you want, I can deliver the bandit chief to you today, will you?" The big fox looked at Minos for a second and said in a resentful voice, "Okay, I want him as soon as possible so that I can calm the anger in my heart for what happened." And have you made up your mind about what I said before? As you have already recovered, I do not intend to stay here in this city any longer. You said you would show me the proof, but I would be forced to agree with your offer, right? Don't you think this is too excessive? You say you're different from those men, but it looks like you want to limit me as much as they do. Minos then smiled and said, "It is not excessive, as certain secrets cannot be told in public. But when I said that you would have to accept the deal after seeing my proof, it is partly because you would want to take this chance yourself with everything you have. This is simply the best opportunity for you and Kyla." After saying this, Minos let the mother and daughter eat quietly while he went to have his breakfast. After all, Minos was far from the level where he would no longer need to eat to survive. Not only that, but good food could also bring a lot of satisfaction, even if there were no nutritional needs. Hours passed, and finally, Emlyn's time for revenge came. All of Minos' soldiers were already gathered in an outer courtyard of the mansion. Minos, Dillion, and Ruth were also sitting on a porch, looking at the three men kneeling on the floor. These were Ghoul, Dougal, and the muscular man. Minos intended to leave Yellow City in the next few hours, so he had to resolve the situation of these three. He then said out loud as he looked at Dougal, "You gave me real information, so I will let you live. Release your spiritual strength and let one of the soldiers here destroy your spiritual cultivation." To destroy one's spiritual cultivation, there would be two ways to do this, first by seriously injuring that person's soul and second by dissipating the individual's spiritual energy and then destroying the cultivator's sensitive organ. It was not enough to destroy this organ without the cultivation being dissipated beforehand. This is because the user's spiritual energy always protected the organ, and it was impossible to destroy spiritual energy. It was not palpable, which made it indestructible, even for a god. The spiritual energy could only take shape from the point where the cultivator used spiritual techniques. Dougal then reluctantly released his spiritual energy. Quickly, those at level 40 realized that Dougal's level had gone from level 43 to level 0 in just a few seconds. He looked exhausted. His face was completely pale after doing this. Soon after, one of Minos' soldiers made a small cut at the height of Dougal's neck, removing a small transparent gland from that place. This was the spiritual gland, the organ responsible for the spiritual manipulation of humans. Shortly after seeing this, Minos said out loud while looking at the two remaining men, "Well, there is no mercy for any of you. Sergeant Humber, behead the muscular man and let the mother fox come here." After saying that, Emlyn quickly entered the courtyard with a bloody look in her eyes while she looked at Ghoul and then made her move. Most people in this place didn't even notice when the muscular man lost his head. The sight of what the mother fox did was too shocking for them to look elsewhere. After jumping in Ghoul's direction, she immediately started devouring the former bandit boss. Chapter 72. Emlyn's Story 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 72. Emlyn's Story 1. Ghoul cried out in despair as he saw the big fox devouring one of his legs. This was a shocking thing to see and feel. Imagine witnessing a beast devouring you little by little. At the same time that he felt enormous physical pain, Ghoul also had a latent feeling of fear, knowing that this spiritual beast would completely devour him. It was a maddening situation. A few days ago, he was excited about what this fox and her cub could do for him. But now, that was the end of the line for Ghoul. And with the physical pain and the fear of imminent death, Ghoul quickly began to lose his mind, screaming wildly and even laughing. Wow! It looks like he went crazy. Minos thought, seeing the scene. At the same time, all the soldiers who accompanied Minos on this trip were feeling bad about what happened. Seeing a person being gradually devoured by a spiritual beast was not easy to endure. Some of them started to vomit on the spot, while others were terrified of Emlyn. If she decides to accompany the young master, how can we relax? Many soldiers thought while they had expressions of discomfort on their faces. Ruth then asked Minos. Don't you care that she's doing this? She sighed and ended up saying. Even though he is an enemy, I think it is very wrong to let a spiritual beast devour a human. I don't care. He's getting what he deserves. It doesn't make any difference if he's a human and she's a spiritual beast. Minos said without any change in his expression. With all the knowledge that Minos had, his personality could not be pious. He knew that there were far worse destinations than being eaten by a beast. This was very mild compared to the massacre of entire clans and tribes. In the continent of the beast, even within some tribes, the practice of cannibalism after battles between members of the same race was not uncommon. Thus, devouring human enemies was nothing more than a small action for these spiritual beasts. Hearing what Minos had said, Ruth stopped talking and started to think about it. This was a cruel world, where beasts were turned into human food every day, so why would it be weird if a beast did that to humans? It didn't take long, and Emlyn entirely devoured the former bandit chief. After that, she turned and looked at Minos and then returned to the room, where she and her daughter were staying to wait for him. Minos had already told her to wait for him in that room if she wanted to see what he had to show her. Minos would not take her to the spatial kingdom from an open place full of people, like this courtyard. After the big five-tailed fox left the courtyard, the soldiers finally blew out a sigh of relief. It would be a lot less stressful for them if she weren't around. Alright guys, that's all. Make the last preparations as soon as possible to leave the Yellow City. Minos said after letting out a sigh of relief. He had finally sorted everything out on this trip. Okay, I almost forgot. Let the people of the Yellow City know that we are leaving today. He said before getting up and leaving where he was. After that, he walked alone to the first floor of the mansion, where Emlyn and Kyla stayed. This was a large room, almost empty and with a large carpet on the floor. Dillion had chosen this location to leave the fox pair, as there were no other places in this mansion available to them. Upon entering the room, Emlyn was lovingly licking Kyla's hair while the little fox turned her belly towards her mother. Minos then said with a smile on his face. I'm glad you decided to accept my offer. Now I'm going to take you and Kyla to a different place. A different place? The mother fox questioned. I need to touch the two of you for this. He then said as he bent down and picked up the little fox playing with her mother. Oh. After that, Minos placed another hand on Emlyn's neck and then activated his unique ring, which allowed him to enter and leave the spatial kingdom. Upon noticing Minos' action, Emlyn found it very strange but said nothing. However, repeatedly the surrounding space quickly changed, from an empty and ample room to a highly lush forest. What? She exclaimed aloud as she noticed the sudden change of scenery. This. He brought me to a completely different place. She stopped thinking about it when she felt her surroundings. This was a vibrant place in free spiritual energy in nature, with many plants, herbs, roots, all with a high-level spirituality. It was as if she had entered a treasure of the highest order. How is this possible? Even the dragon tribe does not have such a place. She exclaimed aloud as she ran from side to side. With the well-developed senses of a spiritual beast, she could feel how valuable this place was. But not only the spiritual medicines, the soil itself, the water, and even the air, were all the best possible quality. And the most impressive thing was not that, but the amount of each of the resources. 1, 2. 20.9, 80.2. Gods, how can there be so many saint-grade medicines in one place? And it is all the same type. After sniffing and identifying many plants within the spatial kingdom, Emlyn finally returned to Minos with a look of admiration on her face. It was not for less. With such a place, he could even feed a dragon up to level 100. She then approached Minos and asked curiously. Is this a spatial kingdom? Why doesn't he have any other humans or spiritual beasts here? I only managed to probe 2 humans besides you. Like humans, spiritual beasts that reach level 100 could also create spatial kingdoms. And like a beast of a high-level race, Emlyn knew a little about these cultivation sanctuaries. Even though her tribe had none of its, they knew about the spatial kingdoms of other races, such as dragons. But as far as she knew, these sites were used as headquarters, or general headquarters, where the most important members of these forces lived. These places were the best for individuals to cultivate, spiritual medicines to grow, and practically impenetrable for external enemies. So, it would be a significant waste to create such a place and not use it. For some reasons, this place was not designed to receive a large number of people. This spatial kingdom was made to receive a lot of spiritual medicines, as you can see. After saying this, Minos went to the house that was near the lake while holding the little fox, Kyla, and Emlyn following them. Upon reaching that place, Minos pulled out a chair and sat outside the house while looking out over the lake. He then said, "Well, now you've seen that I can help you both grow to your maximum potential, let's talk about business. What I want you to do is 2 things. First, you must concentrate on strengthening yourself in this place, but don't eat high-level medicines without talking to me first. Second, I want you to run this place when I'm not here. As you can see." Minos pointed to the 2 youths, who were training not far from the house. He then continued. "I don't plan to turn this place into a city, as many of the powers of the spiritual world do with their spatial kingdoms, but I still plan to bring some of my soldiers here. For now, it's just those 2, but in the future, there will be more. And that must be your main job, at least until you reach level 70. If I need your help out there, I will also have to rely on your strength," he said sincerely. Upon hearing her duties from Minos, Emlyn thought this was too easy for her. Living in a place like this was the dream of any spiritual beast, so Minos did not need to ask for it. She was thinking of begging for it. "Since I will be part of your strength, does that mean that you will also help me when I need it?" the fox mother asked in a severe tone. That's right. Well, then you need to know why I came to give birth to my daughter in the north of the central continent. She started to speak in a sad voice. About 6 months ago, my husband and I were kidnapped while traveling to the divine continent. After leaving the west of the continent of the beast, where our clan is located, we were intercepted by a pirate vessel from one of the powers of the central continent. At that time, after we were kidnapped, due to a great storm that happened in that region where we were, the pirate vessel was thrown towards the north of the central continent, in the Kingdom of the End. Chapter 73. Emlyn's Story 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 73. Emlyn's Story 2. The Kingdom of the End was a kingdom located at the northern end of the central continent, being the last piece of land. To give you an idea, if someone traveled always following the north direction on this continent, after passing through the Kingdom of the Waves, that person would arrive at the Kingdom of the End. Emlyn continued to tell his story as he sat next to Minos's chair. For more than 2 months, we traveled on that pirate ship. At this point, I discovered that I was pregnant with my daughter. After that, my husband planned our escape for the moment when we arrived here on the central continent. He was already in the 6th stage of cultivation, so he wanted to hold on to enemies while I ran away to a distant place. He wanted our daughter to have a chance. In addition to him, other beasts that had been kidnapped joined my husband and decided to attack the pirates when we arrived at the continent. And although the other side was able to kidnap us, many of their men ended up dying during those 2 months of sailing. The route that the pirate ship that kidnapping Emlyn was on was one of the most dangerous in the spiritual world. Usually, if someone wants to travel between the 2 continents, this will be done by the southern region of the central continent, the safest route. The central continent was an enormous landmass, which ran from the spiritual world center to the extreme north of this planet. In comparison, the continent of the beast was a landmass between the extreme south and the opposite center of the planet. This caused the 2 continents to be closer to each other, both from the extreme south and north end of each of these continents. However, the sea in the north of the central continent was extremely dangerous, while the sea in the south was very calm. And because of the storm that the pirates went through, their vessel was thrown into the most dangerous sea, from which they could not simply return. Because in this sea, the sea currents are powerful, to the point of the arrays used in the ships cannot circumvent these natural forces. This made it possible to diminish the enemy forces of Emlyn and her husband. She then continued. But that was still an arduous task. They had many spiritual kings and even a spiritual emperor on that ship. She stopped for a second while remembering what had happened with tears in her eyes. When we arrived here on this continent, a great fight started, between the dozens of beasts and the pirates. While some of us were running away, I could see from a distance when my husband and other beasts sacrificed themselves to stop that spiritual emperor. She stopped for a moment and then said. After I ran away, I started to run as far as I could. That was until 2 months ago when I started looking for a safe place to give birth to little Kyla. It was at this point that I came to this region. While he heard this, Minos thought of the memories he had inherited from Henricus Longus. From then on, he knew that some of the prominent families in the south of the central continent, since that time, have sponsored pirate groups, which brought spiritual beasts from the continent of the beast. These families usually bought couples of spiritual beasts of the same race, leaving them together to procreate. After that, they killed the parents right after the cubs were born, preventing any bad influence from being passed on from parents to their cubs. That was the way these families tamed these high-level spiritual beasts without them rebelling after reaching the intelligence of an adult human. These families did not see them as equal to humans, even for those who had the potential to reach level 70. For them, these beasts were only slightly better than the others and deserved only the position of servants of the great families of the central continent. Minos then said. I'm sorry for your loss. But do you know what power is behind the pirate group that attacked them? She shook her head and said. No, I just saw a red triangular symbol on the clothes of some of them. Okay, let's do something about it in the future. Minos sighed and said. But it will take a few decades, do you understand me? I know. Minos knew nothing about this symbol. But that was expected. His knowledge of geopolitics was from millions of years ago, so not knowing about it was expected. But that was a significant lead that he would follow when the time came. Minos then got up from his chair and said out loud in the direction of Allison and Lee. You two, come here. Upon realizing that Minos was here, the 2 youths ran towards him quickly. But soon, the 2 noticed 2 spiritual beasts alongside Minos. A little fox with a tail and a big one with 5 tails. They've never seen anything like this before. Master, what do you want from us? Lee asked as he looked at the 2 spiritual beasts. At the same time, Allison was about to pick up little Kyla when Minos said. Lee, Allison, I want to introduce you to Emlyn. She will take care of everything here starting today. He then pointed to the mother fox, who was beside her. My name is Emlyn, and I will take care of the spatial kingdom. After hearing this, Lee almost lost his balance, and Allison stopped halfway before catching Kyla. The two could not believe that this beast could speak the human language. This was something they didn't know since their dry city was still very humble in that kind of information. As long as you don't use the medicines, I won't get involved with any of you, she said as she looked at the two. All right. The two waved in unison, afraid to irritate this new neighbor that they would have. Allison recovered from the shock after a while and asked in a low voice. This is your son. What's his name? She is my daughter. She's called Kyla. Emlyn said calmly. These human children could be a good company for Kyla, she thought to herself. After all, Kyla had a lot of energy to play with, and there were no other fox cubs around here. After that, Minas spent time in the spatial kingdom to work out the last details with Emlyn and then returned to the Yellow City mansion. Let's see if everything is ready, Minas thought as he left the room where Emlyn was previously staying. He then headed toward the mansion's exit, past the entrance garden, to the gate, where he saw young Ruth waiting. She was beautiful as always, wearing a dress that was neither too short nor too long, with a decent cleavage around her breasts and her beautiful black hair hanging loose in the air. Minas took a good look at her and then smiled as he approached her. Upon noticing the arrival of Minas, Ruth snorted and said, "Humph, you finally decided to go out. Where are those foxes?" "They left. Maybe we'll see them in the future." She then frowned and looked at Minas's face and asked, "Why are you smiling?" Minas said, "Nothing, I was thinking of something interesting. But never mind, let's go. I want to go back and cultivate for a while before we go to the Cromwell Kingdom." "Oh. You're finally starting to take this seriously. Maybe you're excited, aren't you?" she teased. "Ha ha, come on." Minas ignored what Ruth said, heading for the carriage that Dillion was in. It did not take long, and several carriages headed towards the exit of the Yellow City, going to the central region of the Black Plain. As they passed through the city, several residents noticed Minas' movement while having different thoughts in their minds. Some of them wanted this person to stay and rule the Yellow City. Others were happy because they now had no arrogant, or violent, or any kind of leader who could harm them. They could self-govern themselves until a new administrator came to this place. And in the worst-case scenario, they would at least not be exploited in a short time. This was something to be celebrated by the unlucky people in Yellow City. In a restaurant in that town, a tall, strong man was standing next to a middle-aged woman while talking at the door of that establishment. When one of the two sighed, "And that's it." He did what he had promised. He dealt with the bandits and then left. Perhaps the rumor spread by this one is true. What do you think, Rose? I also think that way. I see no other reason than trying to attract labor to their city. Otherwise, they would not come to help us and then return without any gain. Rose said as he looked at the carriages of the Minas group moving away. Well, it won't be long until we're sure of that. The groups left here must be in the dry city by now, the woman said excitedly. Chapter 74. Arriving at the dry city. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. While the group of Minas traveled back to the dry city, several groups that left the Yellow City were already within the largest city on the Black Plain. Since Minas asked for the release of information that there would be jobs here, many unemployed people got together and have moved towards this city to investigate the situation here. Upon arriving in the dry city, they all had the same reaction. That was stupefying. They could hardly believe that this was the place that must have been far worse than their city. There was nothing to indicate that. Even the spiritual energy in the town was on par with that of the Yellow City. And not only that, seeing the lush fields of crops not far from the city showed them that there was indeed a great demand from farmers in this place. After all, the dry city had less than 50,000 inhabitants, who certainly couldn't handle all the work available. Because of this, by the time they got close to the city, almost all of these people already knew that the rumor was true. However, as they were already here, they wanted to learn a little more about this place. After all, just because there are opportunities, it doesn't mean that the quality of life here is better. In certain places, these people could very well be enslaved. And at that point, they were even more excited. The city was experiencing steady growth, with several buildings being built in regions further away from the city center, with buildings being remodeled and expanded further to the core of the dry city. It was the reality of a growing place, a land of opportunities. But it was not a disorderly and chaotic growth. No, everything seemed planned to have the best infrastructure possible. Some streets were extensive and connected several parts of the city, while there were places concentrated in certain activities, such as public buildings, residences, shops, etc. The image that the city had was also charming. There were public squares, lots of trees in the streets, clean and well-marked streets. In general, the town gave a very favorable impression to visitors of the Yellow City. Meanwhile, the pair of friends from the Yellow City, the merchant Lance and the alchemist Edric, was also already in the dry city. They had arrived in the town of Minas yesterday morning and had already seen many things that had surprised them to the core of their beings. The very fact that it was possible to plant on these lands was something of inverting the sky and the earth. They had heard from residents of the dry city about the miraculous deeds that Minas had been doing in the town. For both of them, this person was fascinating, maybe even supported by a great power from the central continent. At this time, the two were drinking tea on a balcony of the Four Seasons Hotel, where they were staying. The place was not luxurious, but it was well maintained and had a fabulous view of the city. There was a small table with space for two, a beautiful picture on a wall, and a glass balcony. Edric then broke the silence after drinking a cup of spiritual tea. I'm honestly amazed by everything I've seen here. Although many things are missing in this city and the quality of services has not yet reached a high level, it is only a matter of time before this is resolved. Lance shook his head in agreement and looked at the view of the city as he said. Indeed. But I'm curious as to the background behind this Minas Stewart. Once I was still at the beginning of my career as a trader, I heard an interesting story from a cultivator from the Eastern Empire. Oh. I don't remember you telling me about it before. How is this story? The old alchemist asked curiously. Old friend, it happened over 200 years ago, so it's normal for me not to remember those old things. Lance smiled as he said. This may also just be a legend that has been augmented. But anyway, the story goes like this. About 10,000 years ago, a revolutionary cultivator from the Eastern Empire emerged. According to the tale I heard, this person came from a humble background. Still, in a few centuries, he raised an entire weak region within that empire to a level equivalent to that of the strongest families in this world. After that, he became the foremost defender of that empire against its great enemy, the Western Empire. They say that the prominent families of the Western Empire have not yet reunified these empires because of him. Oh. Was there such a character? Edric asked in awe. It was genuinely admirable that a single person could defend an entire empire. This man would certainly deserve a round of applause. Lance laughed and said. That's what I heard. If I have a memory, this guy was called Vico Trevisani. But anyway, maybe that's just a made-up story. And do you think that Minas looks like the cultivator of this story? Who knows, at least he will raise this place to a level that no one has achieved in hundreds of thousands of years. Even though he can't compare to the achievements of Vico Trevisani, he could still have his name in the legends. The old man smiled after saying this. But, changing the subject, you must be excited to do business with this place, right? The old alchemist asked with a bit of interest. I am already very old. Perhaps I will pass this news on to my grandson. He is very talented, and it can help him earn his space within the family. Lance responded calmly. And you? This is certainly a golden opportunity for an alchemist who is just one step away from reaching grade point 2, like you. Even if I didn't want to, I would still have to come here. With this place developing, the Yellow City is finished for me. Many people from there will come here. Hell, I dare say that with this place, that city may well end up being abandoned. But this is for the best. Even if this place already has another alchemist, he does not have the capacity to supply such demand. Lance said confidently. About that. While the two old friends enjoyed a conversation while drinking tea and enjoying the city landscape, other groups were making discoveries in this new place. It didn't take long, and someone found out about the Dry City alchemist and the super low prices that he was charging the city's inhabitants. The pills were less than a third of the value found in other parts of the north of the central continent. That in itself was a great advantage for those with low talent who could not afford spiritual pills. Just by residing in this city, they could receive a discount of 700 crystals when purchasing a grade .1, high-grade pill. It was like the city was giving them these crystals. Unbelievable, I can barely make 100 crystals a year, but these people get a discount of that size. One of the Yellow City inhabitants said out loud to a friend who had informed him about it. Hey, Bernard, I heard that they are also going to hire 600 soldiers in the next 3 months. It seems that the minimum criterion is to have blue talent and be a resident of the Dry City. A tall man said while speaking to a close friend. Only that? Of course not, idiot. Only those with the highest level of each stage of cultivation get the vacancies. But it is only a matter of time before we have our chance. Oh. That's nice. How about our group coming back soon? What do you think, Greg? Bernard asked his friend. We better move our family here as soon as possible. Time passed, and the group of Minus was already arriving in the Dry City. They quickly approached the entrance to the city, but nothing caught the group's attention. This was a short trip of just over a week, so no significant changes were visible to the group that left for the mission in the Yellow City. Ah! Home, sweet home. One of the soldiers said as he stretched in one of the carriages. Not only was this soldier happy, but everyone else was glad too. This mission had paid off for all of them, and they still got a few weeks off because of it. It was simply the dream of many of them. At the same time, the butler Dillion looked at the city from inside the carriage and said to Minus. I'm curious to know how many people came from the Yellow City in the past few days. It's only a matter of time before many of them come here. Minus smiled and continued. I want to see when I get back from the spiritual tournament how much the Dry City will improve. But Grandpa Dillion will have a lot of work from now on. Haha. Chapter 75. Public Library 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Upon arriving in the Dry City, the group immediately headed back to Minus Mansion, in the central part of the city. Once there, the group was received by Secretary Mia and Sergeant Pike, who had remained in charge of the city during these past days. When Pike and Mia saw the group return without losses after just over a week, they knew that the mission had been successful, without significant setbacks. Because of this, they were both smiling while waiting to talk to Minus and Dillion about the things that had happened in the city in the past few days. Welcome back, young master, Butler Dillion. The two said in unison. At that point, the soldiers who had traveled with Minus returned to their homes, with Minus, Ruth, and Dillion heading towards the mansion's interior. After walking for a few seconds, the group finally arrived at Minus' office, where they could talk more peacefully. Upon arriving at his office, Minus quickly sat down in his chair and blew out a breath before speaking. Well, how were those last few days here? Did something important happen? Pike, standing on the right side of Minus's table, said with a smile on his face. Nothing problematic has happened, young master. But several people from the Yellow City have arrived in our city in the last few days. This is normal. We have already spread the rumor that there are job opportunities here in the Dry City, so many of them must have come to check this information out. Dillion said as he relaxed on one of the office sofas. Well, this is good. It should not be long before the migration begins, but it will probably happen gradually, as has been happening with the populations that lived in other parts of the Black Plain. Minos was serious for a moment and said. But inform these people, who are already here about the hiring schedule. They should know when the best time to come is. Okay, I'll do this as soon as I get back to headquarters. Pike responded quickly. Minos did not want a large population to come at once. They could have many opportunities in the dry city, but anyone interested in working in agriculture should wait to come here when the harvest is close to being done. Thus, it would not be long before they got their jobs in the fields of the Black Plain. Of course, if these families decided to come early, the dry city would still welcome them with open doors, even before the next harvest occurs. Many other opportunities within the city demanded new people. So, those people who came earlier would still have something to do around here. For example, the city currently had only one hotel. Certainly, some hotel families in Yellow City could take advantage of this fact and increase the number of hotels in the city. This action could create a growth cycle, with hiring employees, hiring builders, purchasing items in stores, food, etc., that could favor the local growth. Only adding a new hotel in the city could stimulate the local economy. But that was just something shorter. Many services were still lacking in the dry city, such as high-end restaurants, blacksmith shops, hooray shops, medicinal shops, among many other necessary activities needed in a developed city. After Pike gave his answer, Secretary Mia then spoke for the first time. Young master, the public library that you requested has been ready for a few days now. Oh. I almost forgot about it, young master. As requested, I had passed on your order to Secretary Mia, but I forgot to probe how this library was doing. Dillion said with an apologetic smile. Minos had given the order for this library to be built before he left for Stone Island months ago. He wanted to make blue-grade techniques available so that anyone in the dry city could learn it. This was an essential measure for strengthening the city's population. This is because, although blue-grade techniques do not attract the attention of the big powers in this part of the central continent, people with low talent and from outside large families, generally they could only be content with white-grade techniques. This was indeed a significant disadvantage for them, and it was challenging to resolve. To give you an idea, subordinates from large families and with black talent generally had techniques of blue-grade and one or two of black-grade classification. Those with blue talent generally had white-grade techniques, mostly, and blue-grade techniques, in their minority. And those poor white talent people, even having a blue-grade technique, could be considered a dream. And that was also one of the reasons why low-talent people cultivate so slowly. This was due to their low-grade cultivation techniques. For example, a white-grade technique has 40% efficiency, while a blue-grade technique has 50%. With this, someone using a blue-grade cultivation technique would be 25% faster in cultivation than someone using a white-grade cultivation technique. Such a difference was not slight. If these people cultivated for 100 years, one would gain a 25-year lead over the other. Talent could also increase or decrease someone's cultivation speed, but the more significant effect of cultivation speed still depended more on the quality of the trained techniques. Because of that, people with excellent techniques could cultivate up to the third stage of cultivation in a few years, but those individuals with inferior techniques had to work for decades to achieve this. Because of this, Minos had decided to release these techniques for the inhabitants of the dry city to increase their strength more quickly. And as to why he didn't do it before, it was because they didn't have enough budget or even a high number of techniques of that grade. First, their budget was limited and was focused on increasing the cultivated land, increasing the numbers of the Black Plain Army, and buying the necessary resources for the soldiers of this place. As for the number of techniques, the Minos group originally had less than 100 of its, which was a small number to start a library. But as the army was formed, the butler Dillion was collecting blue-grade techniques from soldiers who were receiving black-grade techniques until he collected more than 1,500 techniques. This happened about 4 months ago before Minos gave the order for the public library to be built. Minos then smiled and said, "Well, there is no problem. Grandpa Dillion can pass on those blue-grade techniques to the library. We will open it tomorrow for the population." After saying this, the group said goodbye, and each of them went about their business. Pike went to resolve the issue of future immigrants from Yellow City. Mia continued with her administrative services while Dillion headed towards the library that had been built, not far from the mansion. As for Ruth, she went to her room, in the visiting area of Minos Mansion, where she stayed. She wanted to rest from the last days of the trip, taking a good nap. After all, even for cultivators like her, it wasn't comfortable to sleep during multi-day trips. As for Minos, he returned to the spatial kingdom and decided to rest for a few hours before training. It was better to rest in a place richer in spiritual energy and a quiet place like the spatial kingdom. This gave a feeling similar to sleeping in a heavenly place, with a pleasant temperature and the sound of the wind in the background. A few hours passed, and the news that the Dry City Public Library was to be opened had already spread throughout the city. Of course, Minos' subordinates had done this under his orders. After all, it wouldn't make sense to open a place like this if people did not know that. And because of that, thousands of people were very anxious because, for many of them, they could finally train a blue-grade technique. But not only that, for many people this was also an opportunity to live more. After all, many cultivators of this city were already at the end of their lifespan, with only the hope that they would step up before their times were over. And with blue-grade techniques and the living conditions of today's Dry City, many of them were hopeful of being able to extend their lives for a few more decades or even centuries. This was also the goal of the children and grandchildren who watched their parents and grandparents dying little by little. These people wanted to work hard to pay for the spiritual pills, which could help their ancestors increase their life expectancy. Somewhere in the city, 2 women were talking about the recent news. "Hey Wanda, how about we go together to the opening of the public library tomorrow?" An adult woman asked a friend after hearing the rumor with her husband. Wanda then shook her head and said, I think we better wait a day or two. I think that place will be full tomorrow. We should wait to do that later." Chapter 76. Public Library 2. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Time quickly passed, and it was the day that the Dry City Public Library was opened. Minos did not plan to make any speeches or anything like that. He was not a populist who needed to appear to the people. No, he was the sovereign of this place, so he was bothered by the local development, but he was not concerned if people would like him more or less because of it. Minos just wanted to look at the place up close so that he could understand if everything was following his requests and if this was a place aimed at the citizens of the Dry City. That way, after having breakfast with Ruth and the butler Dillion, Minos did not delay and proceeded to the place where the library had been built. The place was not far from the mansion of Minos, just about 10 minutes' walk. In fact, this part of the city had several other public buildings, such as the Preparatory Academy of the Dry City, the Black Plain Army's headquarters, and the mansion of Minos. As they approached the library site, Minos Group soon came across a masses of hundreds crowded in front of that place. Wow, this really seems to be important to these people. Ruth thought as she saw this. This was shocking to her. After all, Ruth had grown up as a disciple of the Grey Cloud sect, where she never had to worry about the quality of her techniques. And not only that, but Ruth also did not know the reality of those with low talent, people who lived in impoverished regions, like the population of the Dry City. For her, this whole trip to accompany Minos to the spiritual tournament had been a great lesson in her life. She was learning about the difficulties of those at the base of the Central Continent Society, who were responsible for doing those services that people like her did not want. People like her wanted to eat food rich in spiritual energy and receive their arrays and weapons wherever they were. But it was only after that trip that she began to understand what these people had to do and how they were poorly paid for it. And for these people, even blue-grade technicians could still make them happy. While Ruth had many thoughts about this place, Minus Group finally arrived in front of the library building. In this place, there was a rectangular building, with construction with a large roof showing in the middle. There was also a name at the top of the building that said, Dry City Public Library. It was exactly what this place was. Minus didn't want to put a strange name or even give his own name to a building. That would sound very narcissistic to him. So, he chose to keep things simple and leave a simple name like this. Meanwhile, the crowd soon recognized Minus and his group, becoming even more agitated. These people were pleased that this place was being opened and also because of the presence of the person who was changing their lives. Upon arriving in front of the building, several soldiers from the Black Plain Army were already at the site. They were here to ensure the safety of the people, preventing a big uproar from forming. They also had to ensure that Minus entered the site before it finally opened to the public. Upon entering the building, Minus was attended by one of the people who had been hired to work in that place. He also lengthened all the employees responsible for the site's security, receptionists, cleaning staff, and those who registered and cataloged all the techniques present in this building. Although the number of current techniques was small, it would not be long before this place had tens of thousands of parchments, which would certainly need to be subdivided into certain zones to facilitate citizens' access. At that point, the director chosen for that library stepped forward and said, "Welcome to the Dry City Public Library, young master. My name is Ivy, and I'm responsible for showing you the library's facilities." Come on. Minus replied without showing any change in his expression. "First, this place where we are in is the library's entrance hall. This is where citizens will have to pass to access the library, where they will be able to find bathrooms, and identify themselves to access the cultivation techniques of this place. To get the entry permission, the citizens just need to use their citizen identification array, which each inhabitant of the Dry City earns when paying the city's annual tax for the first time." They then left the entrance hall, which was basically a reception, in the shape of an ellipse and with 6 side aisles on the right and left sides of that place. Each of these corridors led to large spaces with multiple shelves and individual rooms. They entered one of the corridors, and Ivy continued her presentation. The 6 corridors we saw earlier in the entrance hall lead to places where cultivation techniques are divided into attack, defense, moving, cultivation, support, soul, just as the young master asked. In this corridor that we are going through, we will arrive at the place where the techniques focused on the attack are. Soon after leaving a corridor of about 30 meters, which had several plants and windows to the street, the group arrived at a square place, with several side shelves and some tables in the central part of the place. There were also some rooms upstairs where cultivators could learn to use these techniques. For now, as we have few copies of each technique, library users will not be able to borrow any of them. Therefore, they will be able to use the rooms on the upper floors to learn the basics of each technique. For the techniques in question, cultivators generally only needed to train them for a few hours with the parchment. Then they could follow their training on their own. The technique parchment was used only when a cultivator learned a new technique. Ivy then said, "We currently have 100 individual rooms in each section of the building, giving us a capacity of up to 600 people at the same time." They then proceeded to the upper floors, where these individual rooms were. These rooms were divided into 4 floors, on which on all floors there was a large quadrangular opening that overlooked the area of the tables in the section they were in. As in the place where the group of Minus was, the part specialized in techniques focused on attack. After seeing the rooms, which had an average size of about 50 square meters, the group ended their visit to the Dry City Public Library. As soon as they said goodbye to the staff in that building, Ruth asked with a curious smile on her face, "I don't know if I understood the reason for the soul.focus techniques section. You know that such a technique could only be learned by a spiritual saint, right?" "I know that. Minas said dryly. Do you know? So, do you expect many spiritual saints to come and learn techniques in this place? Ruth said as she held her laugh. She knew this place would get stronger, but it was still ridiculous that Minas was planning to have spiritual saints living in the dry city. Even in her sect, there were not many of these experts. But young Ruth did not know an important fact, which was about the fact that the spiritual root of the Black Plain is slowly recovering. With that, in less than 30 years, this place would be as rich in spiritual energy as the headquarters of the Grey Cloud sect. You don't have to worry about that. What difference does it make to you? Minas asked while hiding the truth from Ruth. Their relationship was excellent, and Minas didn't care that Ruth attended his meetings, but he didn't need to tell the secrets that could take his life. That was just the most reasonable thing to do. After that, the group left and welcomed the external public to enjoy the local library. After Minas' group left the building, one of the soldiers came to the audience and said it aloud. Welcome to the Dry City Public Library. I ask you to form 5 lines for those who want to enter. 1 for those who want to learn. The soldier gave all the necessary instructions for safe entry into the building, stressing the limit of people who could enter at once. It didn't take long, and 500 people entered the library with big smiles on their faces. At the same time, the people outside were quite euphoric with the expectation of learning new techniques. And of the 5 lines, obviously the one for the cultivation techniques section, it was the longest of all, easily passing 1,000 people. But luckily, the soldiers had prepared a place for these people. Otherwise, the line would pass through several city blocks. Chapter 77. Public Library 3. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After the Dry City Public Library opening, 2 days passed quickly, but the place was still vibrant. In this period, more than 6,000 inhabitants of the city had passed through this building, and there were constantly queues in the region where the library was. And while the citizens of the Dry City took advantage of this new service, visitors to the Yellow City were also super excited to move here. With that, they could pay the annual tax of 1 low-grade crystal and get their identification array to access this library. Because of this, those visitors who were still getting to know the city, after learning the library's rules, left with prey to return to their hometown. They no longer wanted to waste time, bringing their families to the Dry City as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the 2 old friends who came from the Yellow City found out the rumor about this place and were now walking through the Dry City streets while they talked. It looks like this Minas is even more impressive than we thought. I've never seen anything like this before. Even the royal family of the Kingdom of the Waves, one of the strongest in this region, would never give their blue-grade techniques to the common population. Old Lance said with a serious look on his face. If before I had no choice, now it got even worse. At this rate, it is only a matter of time before the Yellow City is completely abandoned. You can't compete with that. The old alchemist said with a smile on his face. He had nothing against moving to the Dry City, but he was amazed by the aggressive measures that Minas was taking. Did he want to raise the population level without worrying about them being his subordinates? Or was he so confident in his strength that he could do it without fear of the people going against him? After all, retaining blue-grade cultivation techniques was a measure to concentrate power in the hands of the dominant families in the north of the central continent. This is because these families had few black-grade techniques. Therefore, what defined regional power was the blue-grade techniques. If numerous cultivators with blue-grade techniques decided to rebel, even the most prominent families in this impoverished part of the continent could be completely wiped out. A cultivator with better techniques could deal with several enemies. Still, if the number of enemies was too high, it would only be a matter of time before defeat happens. For this reason, noble families generally retained many techniques to avoid civil war. I was thinking about letting my grandson take over, but it looks like I'm going to have to make the first contact. Otherwise, another person from the Kingdom of the Waves could partner with him before us. Lance said with a concerned look. For the old merchant, this library and agriculture in the dry city, together, could attract the entire population of the Yellow City in a few months. And not only that, it would not take long, and other places would also start receiving news from here. So, if he didn't take advantage of this moment to meet Minos, then he could only regret it in the future for missing out on this big chance. Why don't you come back and make your grandson come here then? Edric asked curiously. He then continued. I am sure that the dry city will still be a few months away from undergoing major changes. I know that, but little Todd is already traveling to the Cromwell Kingdom to participate in the spiritual tournament, so he should only be returning in almost 7 months. Old Lance said proudly. His grandson had a black talent, level 38, at 18, and it wouldn't be long before he passed his grandfather's level. Oh. I almost forgot about that. I hope he does well in this competition. He can have an even better future with that. Edric said as he massaged his mustache with a smile on his face. After talking all the way to Minos Mansion, the two finally stopped when they entered that busy place. There were currently people coming and going in droves all day in that place. After all, the mansion was the center of operations, which controlled the army, the group of farmers, the library, city administration, and the spiritual academy. So, having a few hundred people coming and going at any time of the day was very typical for this place now. After asking the soldiers on guard at the mansion for directions, the two old men soon arrived in the area where Minos's office was located. At this point, there was almost no movement, with only a comfortable waiting room, with sofas and a decor that could entertain those who pass by. There was also a reception, where a young woman with a voluptuous body was working. That was Mia. Upon noticing the two old men in the room, Mia soon put aside what she was doing and came to receive them. Hello, welcome to the Dry City Government Mansion. How can I help you? Hello, young lady. We want to speak with the local sovereign. My name is Lance Cohen, and this is my friend, Edric. We came from the Kingdom of the Waves, and I believe that we can do business with this city. Lance spoke politely, without any arrogance. Oh. So that's it, I'm going to talk to the young master right now and see if he can meet you. Mia said before leaving for Minos's office. Bedo. Young master, about the development of the base. A soldier was speaking when Mia suddenly entered the room and went to Minos's table. Young master, I'm sorry to bother you, but there is a person from the Kingdom of the Waves asking to see you. He says he wants to do business with our city. Upon hearing this, the butler Dillion, who was also in the office, smiled and said. That was pretty quick. Oh. Then that's it. After that, Mia informed Minos about the names of these visitors and then went out to bring them to Minos' office. The young steward was always willing to make new allies. A few seconds later, Minos dispatched the soldier who was up to date on constructing the base on the coast of the Black Plain while waiting for the two old men. Soon after, a man with a white beard and another with a mustache and white hair entered the room. Seeing how young Minos was, the two could hardly believe it. They expected to find a young adult or something, but that sovereign was even younger than Lance's grandson. After looking in shock at Minos for a second, Lance finally tried to fix himself by stirring his beard and said. Cough. Nice to meet you, Mr. Minos. We heard about you for the first time in the Yellow City. I just didn't think you were that young. Nice to meet you too. I already expected something like this to happen. But anyway, what business did you come to talk about? Minos asked in curiosity. There were many possibilities for that, considering that these old men probably already got a good look at the dry city. Still, Minos was not sure what they wanted. So, he was curious about these two. To the point, I like it. There are many possibilities. I can supply items for spiritual arrays, medicines for alchemists, I can sell your cultures in the Kingdom of the Waves, etc. I understand. As for selling my crops in the kingdom of the waves, this may take a few years to happen since I am already supplying to another region, and I am not able to assist elsewhere for so soon. But my city certainly needs an array shop, or a blacksmith shop, etc. We need more alchemists too, and of course, the resources for that. Lance then smiled and said. So that's it. Well, we can open a store in your city, where the population or the government itself could buy and order all of these items. As for bringing array masters here, this is not easy. I recommend that you visit the Kingdom of the Waves and negotiate directly with the array masters. Our kingdom has many experts in this area, so you can find someone who agrees to make a deal and come to this region. Oh. That's good, having a store in our city can make things easier for us. As for visiting the Kingdom of the Waves, I will do so in the future. After that, the group chatted for a while, with Lance introducing Edric as an alchemist. Upon learning of this, Minos immediately made the same offer to Edric that he had made to Davis. After all, Davies alone would not be able to suppress the demand for pills in this ever-growing city. And when he heard Minos' offer, Edric immediately accepted it, being very happy to have come with his friend Lance. Otherwise, no one in the dry city would do business with him since the price difference would be truly huge. With that, it was agreed that the Cohen family would open a store in the dry city, where items related to alchemy and arrays would be sold and ordered. Chapter 78. Training in the Spatial Kingdom. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. A month quickly passed in the dry city. During this period, practically all the original citizens of the city passed through the local public library, learning at least one cultivation technique of blue grade. It was a busy month for these people, who had to face long lines just about every day. After all, many of them were already at least in the third stage of cultivation, so they could use up to 3 techniques. And even though they needed time to get used to their new techniques, many citizens returned to find defensive or attack techniques in that period. So, there were always many people standing in line, waiting to enter the dry city public library. Several families moved from Yellow City to here during this period, further accelerating local growth. According to the Black Plain Army estimates, about 4,000 people had already moved here in the meantime since Minos and his group had returned. At this time, Minos was cultivating within the Spatial Kingdom with the young Lee, Allison, and the 9-tailed foxes. Lee was resting under a tree while Allison played with little Kyla, who had already grown a few inches since she moved here. The growth rate of this little fox was excellent, and according to Emlyn, she should be able to reach her second tail in another month. As for the 2 youths had increased 1 level in that period, reaching levels 24 and 23 for Lee and Allison, respectively. At the same time, Emlyn was lying on the side of the lake, watching Minos cultivate. She was very happy to have come to this place. Here, she could relax and watch her daughter grow up without being disturbed by the dangers that the central continent had for spiritual beasts like them. Minos was seated not far from the house while cultivating his specialized cultivation technique, Solar God Breath. He was in a meditative position, breathing slowly as if he were completely unaware of his surroundings. All he felt, at that moment, was the spiritual energy around him. Each time he inhaled, a flow of free spiritual energy in nature gathered around him as it was gradually absorbed by Minos' body. It didn't take long, and the sun's rays within the Spatial Kingdom passed through Minos, just as he was breaking through to the next level. At that moment, the air around the young Stuart began to slightly distort, as if it were one of those mirages on hot days. And a few seconds later, the low popping sound was heard. Crack. After that, a beam of spiritual energy quickly entered Minos' body, and he finally reached level 36. Ah! It's really nice to be stronger. Minos opened his eyes and blew out a breath. After leveling up, his body was full of energy, to the point where he felt a sense of satisfaction with himself. Shortly after that, Minos began his training in battle techniques. First, he trained the spatial sword technique until he ran out, executing a few dozen moves. After eating some spiritual fruits and absorbing the energy of some low-grade crystals, he activated an array of attacks while beginning to train his defense technique, Indestructible Body. And finally, he eventually trained his support technique, Devouring Art. But this technique was somewhat strange to increase the user's proficiency since he needed to use this technique in living beings or spiritual arrays. He literally had to waste several crystals in an array to train this technique or to battle almost constantly. Devouring Art did not devour free spiritual energy in nature, only being effective against the energy stored in living beings or manipulated by spiritual arrays. So, it was not possible for Minos to simply train the technique in other ways. As for why Minos was not fighting anyone, this was because he was already much stronger than the soldiers over his power, and he preferred to train within the spatial kingdom. He also couldn't use this technique on Emlyn since she had much more than 100% more spiritual energy than Minos, so she could ignore the effect of the technique. After all, she was almost in the 6th stage of cultivation, while Minos was just over half of the 4th. Finally, Minos finished his training and returned to his mansion after taking a long shower in the spatial kingdom. He wanted to stay a few more weeks in the dry city before finally leaving for the Cromwell Kingdom, where he would participate in the spiritual tournament. As Minos walked from his residence, inside the local government mansion, to the administrative part of the building, he came across a beautiful young woman with long black hair coming towards him. She had sexy curves and a cute expression that would make anyone rethink her age. That was Ruth. She looked at Minos for a second and soon noticed that there was a slight change in his spiritual energy. Did you level up again? She thought as she probed young Stuart. She then said. Well, you're already at level 36. Don't you think it's time for us to go to the Cromwell Kingdom? It's still early. There are still about 4 months to go. We will wait until 3 months to go. Only then will we make this trip. Minos said with a subtle smile. You must be wanting to delay my cultivation by making me stay here. Maybe you don't feel good about being accompanied by a beautiful young woman who is stronger than you. She complained in a provocative voice. You shouldn't have delayed your cultivation, as you must have a lot of spiritual crystals with you. As for the other thing, I don't even think it's bad to be protected by a beauty like you. Minos said while flirting with Ruth. Upon hearing this, Ruth blushed and said before leaving. Do you think I'm going to fall for your conversation? I'm not like that Stone Island bitch. This we will find out. Young Stuart whispered in a low voice with the corners of his mouth slightly lifted upwards. In addition to being the most talented person Minos knew, Ruth was also beautiful. She had a beauty that could move the masses, with her flawless face and a sensual body that could make any man's blood boil. For these reasons and the fact that he was a young man at the beginning of his sex life, Minos had certain desires about Ruth. After all, it was difficult to avoid this. The two had been spending a lot of time together since Stone Island. In these situations, the sexual tension was quite common. After getting the indecent thoughts out of his head, Minos arrived at his office and received some reports from Secretary Mia. First, according to Mia, the city was growing very fast, and soon the old city walls would be unusable. And with that, the city would be exposed to anyone who wanted to enter here, including possible wild spiritual beasts. Second, according to the soldiers sent to the coast, the base of that place was almost complete, being within the deadline to receive the Nash family ships within 1 month. I see. It is good that this base is already ready. This will avoid any delay in our first export to Stone Island. Minos sighed and then said with a serious look. As for the city's wall, make arrangements for a new one to be built. We are going to do this around 10 kilometers from the current city. This will be great for the size of our town at the moment, but it will avoid the need to do it again in a short time. We will also make 4 checkpoints, where there will be small bases of operation for the Black Plain Army. Upon hearing all of this, Mia shook her head and said before leaving the room. Okay, young master. I will prepare for these matters to be resolved as soon as possible. This will also be an excellent measure to employ these immigrants from the Yellow City. It will still be a few months before they are hired by local agriculture. Minos thought as he did the calculations with his fingers. It would be good if these people who have already moved to the dry city would not be unemployed. And with the new wall, these people could have a temporary occupation for the next few months. This would stimulate the local economy, with more people buying and paying for services within the city. The Black Plain Army would also hire another round soon, but the number was still too small to make a big difference at the moment. After that, the next few weeks were very quiet in the dry city, until finally, it was time for another harvest. With that, regular trade in the Stone Island would start quickly, and as soon as these items were sold, the Plain Black could reinvest the crystals in more areas within the city. It was also time for Minos to begin his journey to the Cromwell Kingdom, which he had been putting aside since he had met Ruth on Stone Island.l.rg. Chapter 79. Leaving for the spiritual tournament. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. It dawned slowly in the dry city when Minos and Ruth got ready to leave. This time, only the two would travel to the Cromwell Kingdom since the journey was too long, and Minos' soldiers would no longer be helpful in protecting him. Minos was almost reaching level 37, so if he couldn't handle something, his soldiers definitely couldn't either. Of course, a large group could help him, but that would only delay them and even create some problems. That way, traveling alone would help the two keep a low profile and be faster. Butler Dillion would be in charge of the dry city during this period. The two youths, who were in the Spatial Kingdom, have now returned to their families. Both took advantage of the training time and once again managed to increase their level. It would not be long before the two reached a relevant role within the Black Plain Army with such speed. In the past few weeks, the harvest had been made and sent to the army base on the coast of the Black Plain. Minos hoped that his products would begin to be sold on Stone Island in less than a week. And according to his calculations, it would not be long before Elon sent his payment, which would allow the expansion of the actions of the dry city. Because of this, Minos was very eager to go to and from the Cromwell Kingdom and then seeing all the changes that would take place in his territory. After all, Minos' products would be sold for more than twice what he charged within his territories. So, it was pretty exciting for him to think of all the things that could be resolved with these extra crystals. Finally, Minos and Ruth decided to leave the city as soon as the day cleared. It would be better for them since the first town after the dry city was almost a full day of travel, and with that, they could stop to rest in that place. Right now, Minos and Ruth were on the south side of the town, saying goodbye to Butler Dillion and a few other members of the dry city government. There was also a large eagle with white feathers and a yellow beak waiting for them. Have a nice trip, young master. I hope you do well in the spiritual tournament. Secretary Mia said with a smile on her face. Pike then laughed out loud and said, "Hee hee, considering the strength of the young master, I doubt if anyone is his match." He then continued. "But young master, how long will you be gone?" "I think about 4 months, more or less. The spiritual tournament will take place exactly 3 months from now, and after that, I still have to travel for almost a month to get here," Minos said as he looked around and thought about the trip. According to Ruth, it would take them 3 weeks to get there, but Minos was unsure what the trip would be. After all, he would prefer to go a little slower, taking time to train, than running non-stop to the Cromwell Kingdom's capital. "It's a long time," Dillion said with a thoughtful expression. "But this is a good opportunity for the young master." After that, Ruth and Minos finished saying goodbye to all of them and finally climbed on the great white eagle. This bird was over 2 meters high and could easily carry up to 3 people in comfort. As they climbed on the eagle, Minos realized a type of cell where he and Ruth could sit. The young woman then said with a smile on her face, "You can sit behind me, but don't try anything funny." It's okay," Minos replied as he took his seat. Soon after, the bird took a big leap forward and started flying towards the south of the Black Plain. When that happened, Minos, who had no experience with flying spiritual beasts, was startled and immediately hugged Ruth's waist. "Hey! What are you doing?" she asked with a red face as she felt Minos's arms around her. They had already flown a few hundred meters, but young Stuart had never released her. "I'm holding on to you. Where else can I do that? Your eagle is very fast, and I'm not used to it," Minos said with a slight smile on his face. "Humph, just apologies." Minos then changed the subject and asked her curiously. "Ruth, those 3 weeks of travel, you said, are you traveling slowly or just stopping to rest?" "Stopping just to rest, don't you think we're already too late?" "No, I think we even have too much time. We are going to make the trip little by little. I don't want to stop training for 3 weeks just to arrive earlier in the capital of the Cromwell Kingdom." Minos had a good reason to do this. His techniques of Golden Grade, in addition to being more efficient, also demanded a more great domain for him to advance to the next phase. He needed to train it for longer than other people with lower grade techniques. So, Minos didn't want to stop training for 3 whole weeks, just because of a tournament that he didn't need to win. His goal was to make some important contacts, but he did not actively participate in the competition itself. This was secondary to him, which would test his own strength. "Humph, I know that you are powerful, but you are taken very lightly. Look at my case, I am 18 years old, and I am already at level 45. I will not participate in this competition because I am already a member of a sect of the Flaming Empire. Still, there may be others like me in this place. With silver talent, or even black talent, we don't need outside help to get to the 5th stage, but many people don't care about that and the fact that pills always leave toxins in our bodies. Some people will use everything they have to raise their level quickly. This was a fact in the world of cultivation. Those with high talent generally avoided taking pills or spiritual medicines at the early cultivation levels, as this had a delayed effect at higher levels. When someone takes a spiritual pill, for example, some impurities are deposited in that cultivator's body. But in the initial stages, the cleansing that the body receives from advancing between stages was minimal. It was unable to eliminate all these toxins. The most direct result of this was that these impurities would hinder the speed of cultivation and even the strength of these individuals. This would be like someone who cannot perform at his maximum in a race because he has the flu or other illness that limits him. That is why intelligent cultivators like Minos and Ruth, who knew that to go further, it was necessary to be calm. They did not use pills or spiritual medicines until they reached their first bottlenecks in cultivation. But not everyone was aware of or cared about it. In a region like the north of the central continent, a cultivator with silver talent could quickly reach the spiritual king stage before the age of 23 if they used external resources for this. And as this was a region dominated by people from that stage, some individuals were in a hurry to reach level 50, using these non-recommended methods. "I know that. You don't have to worry about that, Ruth. I am not going to try to be the champion. Sure, I'm going to fight seriously in the tournament, but I'm not looking for that," Minos said in a solemn voice as he continued to hug Ruth's waist. Ruth had already gotten used to Minos's arms at this point, or rather, she was ignoring it with praise. She then said, "You have problems with my master, and she thinks that sending you to this tournament is a way for you to learn how big the world is. Don't you want to prove that she is wrong?" Ruth said this provocatively. She wanted to see if Minos would be affected by this and would try harder to win the spiritual tournament. After all, Minos was still a 16-year-old, and he must have had his impulsive behaviors. He then asked, "And will she watch this competition?" I don't think so. The sect usually sends a spiritual king to do the enlistment work. Sending someone as my teacher would not be worth it. So if I win, I won't be able to have the satisfaction of showing her that she was wrong. It makes no difference. Minas said provocatively. He knew very well what Ruth was trying to do, but it didn't work for him. He had his problems with his mother, but that wouldn't make him make stupid mistakes, just to prove something to someone he doesn't respect. Ah. You are very boring. She complained in a low voice when she saw that Minas would not fall into her trap. Several hours quickly passed. The sun was already setting on the horizon when Minas and Ruth began to approach the first city on their path since they had left the dry city.